Speaking of winners and losers, Charles Darwin had a book called The Evolution of Species and the Struggle for Supremacy amongst the Favored Races. Something like that, about how evolution is basically a race between the races for supremacy, and how there are loser races and winner races. John Taylor Gatto exposed it a lot because Irish were one of the most loser races out there. And in this chapter, he's going to talk about the loser races and the loser geographies of the next millennium. And it's pretty much the same as what Charles Darwin said. So nothing new. But I'm going to cut through the BS in this chapter and explain what he really means and why he says the things he does. Hopefully I can do at least 3 pages before burned out. Taking my medicine. Forgot the name in Sanskrit, but it means garrulousness, or the increases talkativeness. Good for the throat. Blowing smoke into my aloe vera patch out there in the container. Let's get to the picture. The big losers of the next millennium. So in this picture, we see the wizard up there protecting himself from the fire. And here's the family guy right here. Cannot take the fire, while the kids and the women are lamenting the fire that's raining everywhere from this Tower of Babel right here, and everywhere from the heavens, from the gods who are sleeping. The age of Ragnarok. Alright. The big losers of the next millennium will be the inhabitants of the periphery and the biosphere itself. Outside the emerging Pacific and European spheres, 4 billion people will take faltering steps towards a market society and democracy. But market alone, this is important. But market alone cannot develop industry or build the basic infrastructure of health and education systems. So the market is not a builder, it's just a consumeristic market, focused on consumers. It's not an industry to build the infrastructures needed for society, which is reflected in our failing health and education systems. The market alone cannot make raw materials profitable, nor can it protect the environment. Now, these are the big pushes for the next millennium to develop more controlled health and education systems, to make continue the trade, the global trade, the mercantile global trade system, and protecting the environment to control our lives, even regular lives, so we can even leave our houses. Nor can it close the immense and growing gap between the privileged regions and the paralyzed periphery. So the paralyzed periphery, that's the losers, millennial losers. So our birth of chance in a wrong continent can make us winners or losers for most of the people. If the market alone is edited upon to build whole societies It will end up producing the principal revolutionaries of tomorrow who will rise in resentment against the wealthy inhabitants of the privileged centers of the world. So he's saying in order to avoid these revolutionaries from forming, we gotta pay more attention to these other industries. Each of the emerging spheres has a periphery. The peripheral states export their primary resources, which is raw materials, including humans, by the way, to the dominant regions in exchange for manufactured goods. Part of the periphery consists of countries that border one of the dominant regions. Due to their geographic proximity, they are economically dependent on markets in the northern hemisphere. While forming a semi-integrated economic ensemble with their adjacent and wealthy neighbors to the north, they remain largely closed to the rest of the world. So the south side is still going to be the poor side, where life will be cheap, and everyone will dream to leave. Each sphere will continue to extract profits from its periphery, made up of a group of underdeveloped nations. Each of the two spheres will seek to leech off their underdeveloped southern brothers. The periphery of the Pacific sphere is infinitely more promising than that of the European sphere. It includes Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and the countries of Latin America. So East Asia will have a lot of, Oceania will have a lot of regions to leech off of. The Asian countries, almost all, that's why they're so racist, almost all future tigers are already growing rapidly, 5 times more rapidly than Africa. All right, numbers. Their enormous demographic growth. There are already more young people in Indonesia, and I should add China and India, than in all the European community. This enormous demographic growth of these nations is a plus if, and this is a big if the rate of economic growth keeps pace with their population growth, making consumers out of the masses. So it's still important to keep the economic growth up because they don't want, because it's all about civilization, you know. This guy's gonna promote his Agenda 21 universe of the future. He's not gonna tell people, oh dude, all these problems are because of civilization and you need to be free. Because freedom is not what they're telling you it is. And real true freedom is living like a tribal. But anyhow, that's impossible in these peripheries, so let's keep going. Because these big leeches. The countries of the Latin American periphery are in a much less promising position. Their indebtedness will stifle development, making the organization of an efficient market economy difficult. Their entrenched poverty will prevent democracy from sinking deep roots. So yeah, they have entrenched poverty in their genes, you know? That's why they're losers. But anyhow, it's just a less promising position according to him because of their indebtedness. Their dependence, which is part of the bankster system, you know? Their dependence on raw material exports will make it all but their dependence or their enforced dependence will make it all but impossible to sustain growth. Already several countries have embraced drugs, a pariah commodity, to sustain their wrecked national economies. An outlaw economic culture has become entrenched. A few countries like Mexico and Venezuela may be able to escape the vicious cycle of debt and poverty thanks to oil. Now, isn't this interesting? We hear all this talk about Mexicans and Mexico and Venezuela because of their bad leaders and drugs, but we never hear about they have oil for us. We hear about Venezuela, but not Mexico, which is interesting. I guess that's a drawback to the wall, huh? With considerable luck, and because the wall is there, because these countries are peripheries of East Asia, not America anymore. So maybe that's why we don't hear about oil, because it's off limits. With considerable luck, they may be able to escape altogether the southern continents, slide into terminal poverty. Europe's periphery, Africa, is a lost continent. uh, it is one of the last places on Earth in which famine persists. So, since economy, the big E, gives us the air we breathe and the food on the earth, the terrible facts of having fallen into an economic black hole speak for themselves. Since 1970, Africa's share of the world markets has been reduced by half. Its debt has been multiplied by 20 and now equals its total gross product. Income per capita in sub-Saharan Africa has fallen by 1/4 since 1987. Africa's population growth has always outstripped its economic progress, making demographic expansion a handicap instead of an asset. Now that's only because people need more kids in order to survive because of their banksters' global economy that has made them even more impoverished. But that's a handicap instead of an asset. They should become abortionists and child sacrificing people like the Westerners, right? The current population of 50 million will double in the next 20 years, when there will be more people in Nigeria alone than in the Soviet Union today. So this population will double now, he's saying, by today. And there will be more people in Nigeria than the Soviet Union. So somebody should research that factoid, if it's currently true. I doubt it though. Falling exports and investments, coupled with aging machinery and equipment left over from colonial rule, guarantees that the economic plight will only grow worse. The falling exports and investments and the aging machinery and equipment. The most probable future for Africa is tragic. It will be the only region on the let's see what he says. Whole planet. It will be the only region on the whole planet that is entirely excluded from abundance. There is a single possible exception. With enormous luck and skill, South Africa may well emerge relatively unscathed from this fate. Now, South Africa is part of the BRICS nation, I believe, so that's true. A lot of colonialists still live there. All the rich families still live there and have created their ideal slave society. That's why all the Nelson Mandela was so popular too. Model nation of the UN. So South Africa may escape the fate of the rest of the backward Africans. So for both Latin America and Africa, the fall in both the level of savings as well as investment, compounded by the debt burden, has accelerated a precipitous fall in the level of growth. Rising debt has proved particularly crushing. From 78 to 89, the debt in sub-Saharan Africa rose from 19 billion to 143 billion. In Latin America, during the same period, debt rose from 85 to 434 billion. Alright, so let's get to some more losers. The three regions of the world remain largely outside the influence of tomorrow's dominant powers: the Middle East, India, and China, each with close to a billion people. Needless to say, if a miracle were to occur and they were to be fully integrated into the global economy and market, all strategic assumptions underpinning my prognostications would be overturned. That miracle is most unlikely. While India has been bragging how they're well integrated and China cannot be removed from the global integrated world economy, so I think, yeah, he has been proved wrong on that issue, and the miracle did happen. The explosions that racked the Middle East will echo far into the next century. It's a 100-year war, according to the Bushes and the PNAC people. The problems embodied in the North-South relationship converge in this region and will continue to erupt into conflict. The region is volatile partly because there are no stable boundaries and the facts of national histories are still disputed by contending parties. In addition, as William Plath has rightly pointed out, the peoples of this region suffer from the terrible trauma of repeated defeats inflicted upon it by the West.